The touch of your hand makes my pulse react. That it's only the thrill for me.
Hi everyone. Hello. Thanks everyone for coming tonight for the launch of our new reader on love. Our new reader, What's Love Got to Do with It? I guess first I should probably start by thanking Tina Turner and for her beautiful song and whoever it is that slowed the song down to 78% speed for extra sexy appeal. This is what you've been listening to on loop. I encourage you to listen to it more on loop. Tonight we will have two readings or presentations and a performance by Tavi Morod. We will start the evening with K.K. Nielsen reading the editorial from the book, What's Love Got to Do with It? And then David Kim will present some reflections in relation to the book. And finally, Tavi Morod will do a short performance in this space where you can see parts of the performance spread around you already. Over the past few decades, it has often been said that we no longer have an addressee for our political demands. But that's not true. We have each other. What we can no longer get from the state, the party, the union, the boss, we ask for from one another. And we provide. This book on love can be read as a kind of regretful or even optimistic reflection on whether love is the problem or the solution in the current era we live in, either in terms of biopolitics or just in terms of day-to-day politics, right? Have we loved too much, or do we actually need to follow the call to love even more than we already have, right? What do we do with our affinities? Are our affinities with each other a form of an openness to blackmail, or are they actually a secret power that we hold and that we need to claim, right? I think this is the main question with the book. The book is available in the back. I think like e-book versions are available on iTunes maybe like now, maybe on Amazon tomorrow. Buy it. To introduce our speakers tonight. Tavi Morod is a contributing author in the book. She will present the performance Core, Chore, Core, which takes as its starting point Julia Kristeva's suggestion. Core, which takes as its starting point Julia Kristeva's suggestion that a narrative is, all in all, the most elaborate attempt, next to syntactic competence, to situate a speaking being between his desires and their prohibitions. David Kim is a graduate of Yale Law School and the principal at the management consultancy Incandescent. He is also the founder of Juncture, an initiative in art and human rights. Kim collaborates with various artists and curators on projects in connection to contract, intellectual property, human rights, ethics, and finance. And finally, K.K. Nielsen, who is the real kind of force behind the book we are launching tonight, is the book's editor at e-flux. Let's give a warm welcome to K.K. Nielsen.
Brian, and before we start, I just wanted to give a huge thanks and just honor the authors who are in this book. I'll read you their names. It's Paul Chan, Ketty Chukrov, The Cluster Network, Antka Engel, Hufang, Brian Kwan-Wood, Lee McKinnon, Chus Martinez, Tavi Morod, who you'll see perform in a bit, Fred Moten and Stefano Harney, Elizabeth A. Povinelli and Kim Turcotte de Fruscia, Paul B. Preciado, Martha Rossler, Virginia Solomon, Jalal Tufik, Jan Verwert, and Slavoj Žižek. So it's an incredible privilege to have helped in gathering these incredible minds together in these, between these bright pink pages. And it's a further honor that some of these authors brought their bodies here to join us tonight. And quickly, I just wanted to thank, of course, Amal Issa for putting together this program this evening, as well as Rachel Igniowski for doing the ebook, and everybody at e-flux, and of course, the journal and books editors, who are Anton Vidokle, Julieta Aranda, Stephen Squibb, and Brian Quanwood. So this is the preface. It's called Missed Connections. It starts out with two quotes. The first one is, "We must love one another or die." That's W.H. Auden, 1940. "We must love one another and die." Also W.H. Auden in 1955. Greetings, dear ones. That's all of you. There are so many of you, our fellow creatures in arms. Thank you for being part of the small circle of light in these dark times. How does e-flux love you? Let us count the ways. When refugees flee to nowhere, while drones make corpses of civilians and buildings alike, when ancient cities are reduced to dust, and the deep state bureaucracy openly calls its shots, when the old machinery of death rumbles reanimated toward an uncertain future, at such time, talk usually turns to war and rumors of war, not love. What has love got to do with this landscape? One filled with subatomic police states and state-sanctioned acceptance of alternative facts on pain of violence. Is it lust or devotion we seek these days from our colleagues, our lovers, our patron sheiks? How does collective bargaining work when it comes to emotional labor? Should we organize a union or just call a general strike? Who is heading those gatherings up, and who will we find crossing the picket lines the next day? Is the 21st century too much or not enough? A decade and a half, almost 2 decades into the bonfire, the trash pile, the exhibition, this motocross rally we found ourselves both at and in, we wonder, is the beleaguered consciousness picking up this book post-human, post-reality, pre-internet, post-it, pre-collapse, prefabricated according to a bespoke set of algorithmic preferences, or just here in the name of love? Let's see how need and care and desire and admiration have been cross-examined, called as witness, put on parole, made the subject of caring inquiry by e-flux journal authors since 2009. The global art market's capacity for care is somewhat, shall we say, limited. In the very near future, when our robot archivists are among our most celebrated art professionals, certainly the most prolific, we hope you will agree to be part of our everlasting exhibition. May the words and images and notes of emotional labor that you write back to us in response to this invitation be someday scrawled onto apocalypse-proof ceramic plates and buried in a machine-curated fallout shelter underneath the Saadiyat Louvre. May our artworks in progress be transferred from cold storage site to inventory room, with the whir of drone librarians in place of audible sighs of recognition at your clever prodding of maleficent art institutional trends. May your chip stay forever the correct shade of blue. And in the event of precarity, be sure to CC your new Minister of Culture on your email form request for adult services. We're almost done. This book is a Lonely Hearts classified ad dedicated to the memory of chronically care-deprived philosophers burning or vaping the candle at both ends of the demilitarized zone. Did you find what you were seeking out there? When you crawled back into the curatorial present, we thought you were going to ask us for a cigarette, but you asked us for a job. This book is a long word of encouragement to stateless artists in residence aboard Israeli aircraft carriers, making their way headlong into Freeport after Freeport after Freeport. And there's a footnote there which says, as you probably know by now, we are in love with Hitostyrol. And also regarding artists in residence on Israeli container ships, please see Mari Bastashevi, The Perfect Con, which was published in e-flux Journal number 75 in September 2016. Okay. This book is one more object to bring to the international bonfire that has sparked anew in this early 21st century and will now surely rage for a long time to come. We thought about packing Molotov cocktails. We thought about waging urgent email campaigns with gifs of last week's revolution embedded in the body of the message, co-signed by at least 100 well-known curators. We thought about building more itinerant schools in farther-flung regions of the global Rust Belt, estimated the emotional budget for making more radical exhibitions, attended a wider range of good old protests. But here's what actually happened. We came together in the kitchen on the afternoon after the fall, and we decided instead to resurrect 17 essays on love. So here lies, in here, a never-dead body of work on care, affection, affect, ardor, desire, and art. And as Tina Turner was asking us at 78% speed, looped for about an hour before this event, what's love got to do with it? Love is a commodity and a fetish, but is not often traded seriously enough on our intellectual markets or kept in high enough quantity on our theoretical stockpiles. We'd like to encourage a move toward bringing love back in. Thank you from the bottom of our war-hungover hearts. It's been another hideous year, or it will have been by the end of this, whatever. Let's never do that again. But when we inevitably do, let's do it together. We're so glad you're here. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Is this on? Yeah, great. So thank you everyone for being here this evening. Thank you Amal and Brian and Kay and Tavi. Such a pleasure to join you. This is something of an uncomfortable position. It's part of my remit as a speaker to reflect on this topic, love, which ramifies in every direction, and also on a book which many of you probably have not yet read, although I'm sure that you will. So I'll strive tonight just to speak as best I can about a few concepts that I think resonate across these essays and share some thoughts from writers and thinkers much wiser than I, whom I love in some fashion, which is itself a sort of privilege. So let me begin with two concepts that are just adjacent to the word love. One, passion, and two, vocation. Some of this may be repetitive for you, but let's go on together. The first, passion, is from the Latin passio, meaning suffering. And passio, in turn, was likely the Latin rendering of the Greek pathos. The first use of passio dates from early Latin translations of the Bible, in which the word denotes the suffering of Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane and through the crucifixion. And then, since perhaps the 12th century, the word passion has become detached from this specific religious meaning, coming, as we all know, to denote any emotion of particular intensity. Several of the biblical texts describe Christ's experience in the garden, located at the foot of the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. Gethsemane, a word which I always struggle to pronounce, is from the Hebrew for olive press. Christ goes to the garden in the hours just before his arrest. He is already foretold that one of his disciples will betray him. And here's the account of that from the Gospel according to Matthew. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee and began to be grieved and agitated. And then he said to them, "I am deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and stay awake with me." And going a little farther, he threw himself on the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not what I want, but what you want." Yet not what I want, but what you want. This moment is a representative, for some perhaps the representative moment of anguished submission to the will and the purposes of God. And this submission is also such an important element of the notion of vocation, a closely affiliated word, and a word which also has Christian origins. Given that, I find the modern definition of vocation to be quite poignant, quite poetic. And here it is. Vocation might mean entry into the priesthood or a religious order. Or it might mean a strong inclination, a strong feeling of suitability for a particular state or course of action or career. A strong feeling of suitability, this is a phrase that one might, if one held certain commitments, elect to construe as the faint echo in affect of a call just barely beyond audition or translation. Rowan Williams, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, that is to say the former head of the Anglican Communion, offers this account of one popular conception of vocation. He writes, quote, "The trouble with the idea of vocation is that most of us, if we are honest, have a rather dramatic idea of it. I don't mean dramatic just in the sense of self-dramatizing, although it is also that, but dramatic in the simpler sense of the theatrical. Vocation as casting, you might say. God has a purpose for the world, a very long and good play with plenty of juicy parts in it. But the nuisance is that he draws up the cast list before doing any auditions. We find ourselves called to fulfill a definite role, but we haven't actually seen the script, and as time goes on, we may suspect we would do better in another part." Now, of course, of anyone, Jesus has seen the script, but the general point remains. And here's Williams again, quote, "Vocation is indeed a dreadful falling into the hands of a living God. God has decided I may struggle or revolt, but here's this clear will to be done whatever the cost." Williams then goes on to offer a quite different model, one in which vocation describes God's action in calling each person by their true name quietly and steadily. That aside. By now, you might suspect that this dog of a talk is being wagged by a certain sort of exegetical tail. So let me clarify my interest in passion and vocation. I am interested in these two concepts due to their pride of place in contemporary economic and cultural discourse. An inordinate number of entrepreneurs and executives and business people opine on the importance of following your passion. Consider, for example, this quote from Hamdi Ulukaya, founder of Chobani, the Greek yogurt company. He is describing his own entrepreneurial beginnings. I'm glad this is the moment that the audience clicks and they're like, "Oh yeah, Chobani, all right, we're back. You had this quote from scripture. So thank you, the yogurt company." And Hamdi is describing his own entrepreneurial beginnings. Quote, "In the end, you have to find a way to elevate yourself, to be above common sense. Because we cannot do what we have done," he's referring to his own company, "through the glasses of common sense, what they teach in schools, what the reports say, what the market research says. We cannot do it with that view of common sense. We must make a shift. And this emotional shift comes from passion, and profit will follow." So keeping that quotation in sharp relief in mind, let me suggest a few important ways in which the language of passion and vocation, which I would argue continue to retain some traces of their original definitions, might function in this economic system of which we are part, which purports at least to privilege entrepreneurship. First, the language of passion, as suggested in that quote, encourages entrepreneurs to overcome conventional cost-benefit calculations, which are otherwise the bedrock of market behavior, and take on disproportionate risk. This may well be harmful to any one entrepreneur, but from the perspective of an investor who holds a large and diversified portfolio, this is the sort of thing that may well promise outsized returns over time. That is to say, in other words, the language of passion creates a temporary rupture in a certain mode of economic reasoning in ways that are advantageous in the long run to capital. Second, the language of passion and vocation enable the extraction of surplus value from labor. An excellent example of this is Uber, an easy target, admittedly, but an appropriate one. Consider, for example, that its website prominently features driver stories. Here's one, the title of which is Elizabeth's Story, photographer, business owner, Boston native. This is the text. Meet Elizabeth. Starting a creative business takes passion, talent, and time. Elizabeth of Lynn had loads of passion and talent, but her schedule was tight as she planned to start her own photography and design shop. Thanks to driving with Uber, she found all the time she needed to launch her brand titled Euphoria Photography and Design. Now, this is decidedly not a lampooning of Elizabeth, whom I have never had the pleasure to meet. Multiple things can be true at once, and so yes, it might be that Uber in fact provided Elizabeth with flexible working hours and a comparable alternative to medium, low-paid work. In addition, Uber is a business that facilitates the massive upward redistribution of value to investors. To wit, Uber is now valued at approximately $70 billion, despite having lost over $700 million in just the first 3 months of 2017. Its labor model depends fundamentally on offering just slightly better economic incentives to freelancers and others in conditions of precarious employment. And so, on the one hand, the language of passion foments a certain uncertain, creative, small business economy. And on the other hand, it mobilizes those self-same entrepreneurs as laborers who generate value for capital. Third, the concepts of passion and vocation serve to justify what I understand Kierkegaard to mean by the teleological suspension of the ethical. To illustrate this concept, I think primarily in Fear and Trembling, Kierkegaard references Abraham, who, upon hearing God's higher command, prepares to sacrifice his son. This is in obvious contradiction to the ethical norms of the community of which he is part. This is the suspension of the ethical. Now, this teleological suspension of the ethical maps, I think, to a Silicon Valley ethos of move fast and break things. And if we buy that premise, then Travis Kalanick, dethroned CEO of Uber, and Eric Schmidt of Google, and Steve Jobs, they may be our latter-day degraded versions of Abraham. And instead of rebelling against the Jewish law, they are rebelling against other things, maybe antitrust regulation, or in at least 2 of those cases, some basic standards of decent human behavior. Fourth, and finally for this section, we're halfway there, the language of passion and vocation may serve to resolve, partially at least, something like the affliction of choice paralysis. So consider this famous and rather ridiculous study, not uncontroversial, published in 2000 by the psychologists Sheena Iyengar and Mark Lepper. These 2 researchers ran a study about the consumption of jam at an upscale food market. So, on one day, a cohort of shoppers interacted with a table displaying 24 varieties of jam. And on another day, a different cohort of shoppers interacted with a table displaying 6 varieties of jam. And ultimately, the first cohort, those with much more choice, were 1/10 as likely as the latter to buy something. Now, this study, which has been corroborated by some studies and nuanced by others, was interpreted to rebut the conventional presumption that the enlargement of choice necessarily increases consumer welfare. At some point, it seems more choices make people worse off, and not merely as measured by their propensity to consume. Rather, in the words of Barry Schwartz, another psychologist who let's say, indulges in this sort of research, quote, "There is diminishing marginal utility to having alternatives. Each new option subtracts a little from the feeling of well-being until the marginal benefits of added choice level off. Put in other words, more choice can lead to anxiety and regret and excessively high expectations and self-blame if the choices don't work out. When the number of available options is small, those costs are negligible, but they grow. And eventually each new option makes us feel worse off than we did before." Now, insofar as we consume our life paths as so many jars of jam, how do we know that we are choosing correctly? Or in instances in which we are not consumers, but rather investors in ourselves as human factors of production, human capital, the valuation of which is enhanced by the range of options available to us. How can we know which option to cash in? My suggestion here is that liberal theory on its own terms may need to mobilize some version of passion and vocation, that is, some constraint, nominally from without, which the individual can experience as authentic, in order even to stabilize the utility available for capture by the liberal subject. And note that all of this is an internal critique. Set aside anything that you might want to say about this model of self-realization through consumption. So now I've tied the market to a familiar whipping post, and let us continue to wield the scourge of internal critique. So let me set down these two concepts, passion and vocation, and return to the overarching term of the evening, which is to say love. And here I would refer to the really wonderful work of an economic sociologist named Albert Hirschman, who passed away just a few years ago. In 1984, which is presumably before some of us were born, Hirschman published a short and lovely essay with an equally lovely title, quote, "Against Parsimony, 3 easy ways of complicating some categories of economic discourse." Writing in response to such economists as Milton Friedman and Gary Becker won a Nobel Prize, I'm not sure that Milton Friedman ever did, Hirschman notes, quote, "Economics as a science of human behavior has been grounded in a remarkably parsimonious postulate, that of the self-interested, isolated individual who chooses freely and rationally between alternative courses of action after computing their prospective costs and benefits." And then, just as his title suggests that he will, he sets out to complicate some of these key assumptions of neoclassical economics. One assumption on which the model of neoclassical economic behavior depends is that of scarcity. For example, and this I think is intuitive to many of us by now, because resources are scarce, producers must be compensated for the time and the materials and the effort that they invest in production. And because resources are scarce, a consumer will weigh one consumption decision against another, balancing the utility that she might obtain from one choice versus the other. And the price mechanism serves to calibrate this supply and demand. And because time is also a resource, every activity can be understood as costing something, which is a deeply terrifying idea, I think. But various goods and various values do not fit in this model, and in their lack of fit, they suggest some significant limits to the application of this kind of economic thinking. Love is one of these. Here is Hirschman again, and note that he's using love in a slightly expanded sense to include things like civic activity and public virtue. Once love, and particularly public morality, is equated to a scarce resource, the need to economize it seems self-evident. Yet a moment's reflection is enough to realize that the analogy is not only questionable, but a bit absurd. For example, take the well-known case of the person who drives in the morning rush hour and quips, upon yielding to another motorist, "I've done my good deed for the day, and now for the remainder I can act like a bastard." We know instinctively that it doesn't quite work like this. We know instinctively that the supply of such resources as love or public spirit are not fixed or limited, as may be the case for other factors of production. The analogy is faulty for 2 reasons. First, these are resources whose supply may well increase rather than decrease with use. And second, these resources do not remain intact if they stay unused, like the ability to speak a foreign language or to play the piano, these moral resources are likely to become depleted and to atrophy if not used. Which is to say, in other words, love, as against an economics of mere self-interest, requires practice. So, passion, vocation, and the structure of the entrepreneurial economy, love as a partial undermining of neoclassical economics. Here we are, nearly at the end. We began in scripture, so let us end, at least in proximity to it, with a poem written by Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. She was born in 1648, close to what is now Mexico City, and she, even in her own day, unusually was recognized as an accomplished philosopher and writer and poet. As her title indicates, she spent an important portion of her life as a nun, living in a convent from which she carried on exchanges with interlocutors from across the empire. This excerpt is from a long poem titled The Dream, and in particular from a passage in which she is describing the workings of the human body, a thing also prone to atrophy. This, then, sovereign organ and lively core of vital spirits, paired with the auxiliary bellows of the lungs like a magnet attracting air in constant, unvarying to and fro, contracting first and then expanding the muscular conduit of the throat wherein the breath resounds. Cool air from the surrounding atmosphere, a moment held and then expelled as warmth, avenges its summary expulsion with incessant theft of body heat. Only briefly wept, but never more retrieved, losses that, though scarcely now perceived, repeated teach no theft of life is small. And so there is that scarcity, at least. I say, we breathe in deeply, we inspire in order to call to one another, and in this, vocation may be both theft and gift. Thanks.
It's physical, only logical. You must try to ignore that it means more than that.
It's funny, he's gotten much more popular since when I first studied him. It's funny how things get trendy.
This evening,
I guess it
it is
bothers me
fitting to
somehow,
begin
but
with the one essay
I
by
never really
Merleau-Ponty.
follow through on that thought.
It's
all the
actually
way.
quite relevant, you'll see.
You know, like,
It starts like
about
this.
the trendiness.
If it is
like, I
true
don't
that
know
as soon as
how
philosophy declares
a
itself to
trend
be
builds
reflection
itself up into a
or
storm or
coincidence,
whatever.
it prejudges what it will find.
Anyway,
Then once again it must
who
recommence
cares? This line
everything,
is
reject the
brilliant.
instruments reflection and intuition
let
have
me have my
provided
private
themselves,
pleasure of it.
and install itself in a locus where they have not yet been
Qui nous
distinguished.
offre tout à la
In
fois,
experiences have
pêle-mêle,
not yet been
le
worked
sujet et
over, that offer
l'objet,
us all
et
at once,
l'existence et
pell-mell
l'essence,
both subject
et
and
lui donne
object,
donc
both
les moyens
existence
de les
and essence,
redéfinir.
and hence give philosophy resources to redefine them. Seeing,
Did you catch that?
speaking,
Where there's
even
just
thinking, with certain
experience
reservations, for
before
as soon as we
thought
distinguish
intervenes
thought from speaking,
and casts upon
absolutely we are
experience
already
something
in the
extra
order of
that
reflection.
wasn't inherent to it.
Are experiences of this kind both
Is this a
irreducible
testament of the
and
threshold
enigmatic?
between perception and cognition?
It is possible to fall in love with someone through their texts.
The subject of this book will be unfamiliar to most readers.
Memory,
Few people know
neurologically
that the
speaking,
Greeks, who
is a
invented many
thickening of
arts,
certain connections.
invented an
The
art of
synapses
memory
between
which,
neurons
like
through
their other
repeated
arts, was
activation.
passed on to Rome,
Memory,
whence it descended into
neurologically
the
speaking,
European tradition.
is
This
a
art seeks to
strengthening-
memorize through
no,
a
the
technique
thickening of
of
certain
impressing
connections,
places
the
and images
synapses
on memory.
between the neurons.
It has usually
Through
been
repeated
classed as a
activation. Memory,
mnemotechnics,
neurologically speaking,
which
is a
in modern
thickening of certain
times
connections,
seems a rather
synapses between
unimportant branch of
neurons through
human
repeated
activity.
activation.
But in
Memory,
the ages before
neurologically
printing,
speaking,
a trained memory was
is the
vitally
thickening
important,
of certain connections,
and the manipulation
synapses
of images
between the
in memory
neurons.
must always,
Memory, neurologically
to some extent,
speaking,
involve the
is the
psyche as a
thickening of the
whole.
connections, the synapses
Moreover,
between the neurons.
an art which uses contemporary
Memory,
architecture
neurologically
for its
speaking,
memory places and
is the
contemporary
thickening
imagery
of certain
for its
connections, the
images will have
synapses
its
between
classical,
neurons through
Gothic,
repeated activation.
and Renaissance periods,
Memory,
like the other
neurologically
arts.
speaking, is the thickening of
Mnemosyne,
certain
said the
connections,
Greeks,
the synapses
is the mother
between
of the
neurons through
muses.
repeated activation.
The history of the training
Memory,
of this most
neurologically
fundamental and
speaking,
elusive
is
human
a
powers will
thickening of
plunge us
certain
into
connections,
deep
the
waters.
synapses between the neurons through repeated activation.
Through M, through our porosity, through the omni-channel exchange that was the architectonic of our love,
She was
I
born in
too could palpate
1956,
the political poisons
so mysterious
of
to
over
me
there.
because I simply could not understand her behavior.
There, that place
rejection
far
of me.
away, so
When I
far
really
away,
started
so
making
as
work,
to be mythical,
I realized so
to be
much of
so
my thoughts
mediated by
revolved
so
around
many
her,
screens,
as though in the vacuum
and to be
formed by her
screened by so
absence,
many intermediaries,
my being was
that
overflowing,
place became a myth, becomes a
as though
myth.
precisely due to her actual lack, she
The
attained a mythical
romanticism of
overabundance.
foreignness.
She was born in 1956.
But through you, M, these irrealities attained
She was
a
born in
specific
1956.
palpability.
She was
In
born
my
in October
possession of you and being
1956.
possessed by you, I did feel a certain
On
ownership
23rd
of that
October
place. Otherwise,
1956, the
up to
Hungarian
that
Revolution
point, had
took
nothing to do
place.
with me.
It was a
This
nationwide revolt
chiasmic
against
intertwining of where all of you are outside.
public
Yes,
and its Soviet-imposed
became,
policy,
becomes mine.
lasting from the 20th
Your
of
memories,
October
your
until the 10th of
observations, your
November
desires, your
1956.
hesitations,
Though
your
leaderless
fears,
when it
your secret
first
ephemera.
began, it was the first major
had
threat
told
to
each
Soviet
other
control
we
since
would
the
be the
USSR's forces had driven
encyclopedias
Nazi
of the
Germany
other.
from its territories at the
All
end of
that
World War
funnels
II.
into me.
She was born in October 1956.
My inside is exploded by this infinite outside. I know I am starting to sound rambunctious, distracting myself. I can't help it. How can I? In this moment
was
when we're
born
all
in
choking on
1956.
oversized bites of identity
She was born in
discourse,
October
I'm
1956.
tripping over my words. I'm tripping. I'm tripping because I'm intersectional and we're all
globally and
jaywalking.
otherwise. The moment of
Seriously,
my
it's
mother's
making
birth,
me have an
that
identity
was.
crisis.
It was
I mean,
30
it's
years and
making
2
me
months
feel
later
like
I was
my
born.
identity is a crisis.
And with this realization, I was
But
struck by the
here's the
fact that
one
I
real
too, at the
truth.
exact same age,
I am.
I had completed her alleged desire to annihilate her child. Look at me. 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 Look at me.
Take ownership of
Look
your
at
eye.
me.
Be responsible
me.
for what you see.
Look at me.
I do. I am. I try.
Mama!
It's
Mama!
me. It's just me
Mama! Do you, Mama?
here. Me and
Mama!
you.
Mama!
Yes, I mean you, Em.
Mama, do
I
you?
still carry you in my
Mama!
heart. I carry you anywhere I
Mama!
go. You go, my dear.
Mama!
And
Mama! Mama!
whatever is
Do you?
done by only me is your
Mama!
doing, my darling. I fear no fate, for you are my fate,
Mama!
my sweet.
Mama!
I want no world, for beautiful you are my world, my
Mama!
true. And it's you are whatever a moon has
Mama!
always
Mama!
meant, and
Mama!
whatever a sun will
Do you,
always sing as
Mama?
you. Here is the
Mama!
deepest secret nobody knows. Here is the root of the root, and the bud of the
Mama!
bud, and the sky of the sky,
Mama! Do you,
of a
Mama?
tree called
Mama!
life,
Mama!
which
Do you?
grows higher than soul can hope or mind can write.
Mama! Mama!
And this is the wonder that's keeping the stars apart.
Mama!
I carry your heart. I carry it in my heart.
Mama! Mama! Do you, Mama? The song Ombra Mai Fu could arguably be
Did
understood
you
as a song
rescind your
about
citizenship to
gendrophilia.
avoid military service?
What a lovely image or
Will you
icon
never
to
go
have in mind
back?
in this moment of
I
great
won't ever
urgency
know now,
regarding
will
climate
I?
change.
We
Let
won't
there be
speak
yet
again.
room for the romantic
That much was
impulse
clear.
to shine through. And
Through all the
dendrophilia could be
oversized
understood as a
veils of our
subcategory of
hesitations,
xenophilia.
entangling
And
and hampering
xenophilia
our
could be understood
arrogances,
then as a form,
and our
in turn,
collective
as a form of
stubbornness.
xenophagy.
We won't ever
Because
know.
does love not consume?
Would you know I'm right here? Here right now. I've persisted. I've persevered. I've continued. And somewhere I imagine, if it's still possible, you watch the dust settle on a windowsill. Somewhere in Haifa or Tel Aviv, and scratch away in your studio notebook where we once made those collaborative drawings. You one stroke and then you another stroke, 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 stroke. And now, without all that, just sitting
In
there
singing the
somewhere
song,
and listening
in
to the
becoming
sounds
the ancient
specific to
Persian
there.
King Xerxes through song, in performing,
Can you hear the
one
cries
in a
and
sense
shouts of strife,
becomes
discord,
becomes
disease?
the other,
I
camouflages
hear
itself
echoes,
into the
or
other.
just reverberations
It is,
of
one could
myth.
say, a form of
Would you
xenophagy,
know I'm thinking
to so
all
consume the
that
other
right now,
so as to become
here?
them. But
Would
metaphor
you
is
know I'm
displacement,
telling about you to others?
and displacement is deferral.
And would you
deferral
remember
right
that
now
time,
is
the
no
first
good
time we
because
were apart? And
here
I
we are
asked
now.
if you
I
could
mean,
see the moon where you
like,
were.
we're really here right
And
now.
you said yes.
We're here
And I ran
together
to check if I could
right
see
now.
the moon where I was. And I said to you, please keep looking, because I'm looking at it now
And
too.
if we're going to
Look,
be truly responsible about
we're both
terminology,
looking at the same thing at the same time.
xenophagy, when not used in the metaphorical sense, has a specific
And that's how
meaning
much I
in
miss you.
entomology. In entomology, xenophagy refers to a categorical change in diet, such as an
Tabulus
herbivore becoming
Maragina,
herbivorous,
the
a
Emerald
predator
Tablet, is the
becoming
first identified text of alchemy.
necrophagous, a coprophage becoming necrophagous or carnivorous, or a reversal of such changes.
Since she was very young,
Allotrophy is a less
perhaps due to
extreme
the
change in
accident
diet,
of being
such as in the
bilingual,
case of the
she
seven-spotted
collected
ladybug,
words,
which can diversify
way
a diet
of
of
dealing
aphids to
with.
sometimes include pollen.
It's not exactly that
There are
she
also
felt
several
about
apparent cases of
being
allotrophy in the
other.
Israeli
I
Longitarsus
think
beetles.
queers know early on, and even when there is
Allotrophy
possible shame,
should not be confused
deeper
with
inside, deeper
allotropy.
still, I
Allotropy
think there
means
is a
the
delight,
existence of two or more different
a little
physical forms of a
twinkle.
chemical element.
Not because fairies are
Allotropy, then,
inherently twinkly,
is the
but as being
alchemical
twinkle
imperative.
Of knowing you are you.
Alchemy is such
Sorry,
a
not
powerful
sorry to be
metaphor
cheesy,
right now.
but it really is like having a
Fuck
little
it, that
diamond
metaphor's
even
just
under
some
mounds
deviation
and
from the
mounds
real.
of wearisome and
Fuck the
complicated
real.
and baggage
I really
of
don't give a
coal.
shit about the real right now.
She
Although,
liked ladybugs because
although
her mother.
we're really here,
This is
and
one of the few pleasant memories of her.
without these notes, I am really just trying
Had
to
this
make
very
this thing up right
soft
now.
Angora sweater
Really.
that was red with black spots.
But is it
What
better
I'm
than
trying
the
to say
metaphor?
is,
And this is how I
since the
make sense of
time
the
she
world
was
in
a little
crisis.
girl, and through the
Because the
years
present
when that
reality is
twinkle
shot through
went
with the
from
alchemical.
mere sensation
State
to
change,
the hot and
existential
cold
shift,
of
the transformation of
adolescent
being what you
compounded
are.
by whatever societal
Love
crap.
must be that ultimate
To the
alchemical sparkle.
diamond of
I
self-recognition.
think that's what I've been trying to
and
tell you.
acceptance and love.
Of course I'm trying. I'm
She
trying to tell
obsessively
you.
collected the words for ladybug.
Trying to tell a story
like some
always
sort
some kind of
linguistic
struggle against
entomologist.
the failures of
words were
memory, the
bugs or
failures
something.
of the failures to overcome something.
Then he said, imagine that any moment you might get on the bus. You
Seitdem
might
sie
get
das Kind verloren
exploded.
hat. Moment, dürfte sie
That
das
at
eigentlich
any
sagen?
moment you might
Sie
die.
wollte nur an das Kind denken. Und ihre Kunst wird nur etwas mit dem Kind zu tun haben. Selbst wenn es anscheinend um was anderes geht, zum Beispiel den
about it.
Bürgersteig.
I was briefly there once, but I was too dazzled by the newness and my own out-of-placeness that in every moment I couldn't think about this truth that M had once articulated to me. Building upon Germany's history of successful athletic events, including the 1974 and 2006 FIFA World Cup, the 1993 World Championships in Athletics,
I think about the
the
child who
1936
will now
and
never get to live.
1972 Summer Olympics, IAAF President Lamine Diak was confident of a well-organized competition.
But more so than that,
The organizing
I've been
announced a
thinking
budget
about,
of 49.8
not even lately,
million
it's
euro
been
to
some time,
stage
I'm
the
thinking
event,
about
which includes
limited
the travel and
experiences
accommodation
and
costs for all participating athletes.
and this kind of, I kept calling it threshold for a long time,
Revenues
but I don't think that's
include
the right term.
17
It's
million
more like,
euro from ticketing and 7 million
I think it actually
from
had to do
marketing.
with trying to understand this,
The
this
city of Berlin
encounter
will
when
cover
you,
a deficit up to
when
20
you
million
get close to
euros.
someone, let's say, or when you, in any
The
sense,
organizing
you know,
committee
I think
secured
that
9,000
in that
rooms in the
encounter
city
there's
to
this
account
kind
for
of,
accommodation. With
it's
the
like a
hope that the
doubling of
booking the
infinity
hotel
that's
Astral
possible because you have
950 rooms
your own
and Hotel
infinity, like
Berlin
all of your
650 rooms
memories, your
for athletes would create an atmosphere similar to Olympic
desires,
Village.
fears, awkwardnesses, whatever, all the details, and then that's
A limited
constantly
edition
multiplying,
10
like
euro
it's like
coin was produced for
fractalizing.
the event by the German
because
government,
It's constantly
which was only the
recombining, and
third
then there's
occasion
time
that they
loops
had
keeps
done
moving
so
forward,
for a
and then so
sporting event.
all those things keep just
The organizing
yeah,
committee
just
held a contest to decide the name of its
infinitizing, and then you
mascot.
encounter another one of
A
those,
running
and so it's like maybe
anthropomorphic
like
bear,
two
and
galaxies
the name
crashing into
Bovino
each other,
was chosen.
or I
The
don't
color
know.
scheme of the event, including the official logo,
That's
advertising, and the
what I think
Olympiastadion's
for that.
track
But then
and
I'm
field
also
was
thinking
blue and
about that, how that kind of encounter
The committee stated that blue
generates a
represented
kind of,
reliability, while green represented the event's
suddenly like splits
environmental
reality
ambitions.
into multiple realities.
The
Like when
event
you're with
featured a number of
person X, say,
environmentally friendly
then-
initiatives, including
then
free
you're.
public transport with
I
every
really
ticket
think there's this
sold,
jarring moment of
efforts
where
to
you
reduce
are in
energy
that one
usage,
reality, but then
considerations
at the
for
same
waste and
time there's
recycling
that
management,
this
and
the outside to
environmentally
that or
conscious
something, or it's not
construction
even
and
like the
building
binary of inside
management.
and outside. It's just
Furthermore, a
you
part
are
of
into
the
maybe a
United
better
Nations
example is like say
Environment
if
47
you've broken
trees,
up with someone, say,
one
and
for
then you
each
like go
athletic
back and
event,
interact with
were
them. Then
planted to create
I don't know.
an
I think you
avenue
know
of
what I mean.
champions
Like
in
there's
Berlin.
this kind of there's something very very jarring
The
about
broadcasting rights for the
Um,
championships were sold to 213 countries,
And then of course,
a new
just
high for the
to
event.
go back to the idea of
Around
the closeness.
3,500 media representatives were estimated to have attended the
It's
event.
like I think there's such an inherent joy to it because it's like getting rid of that what I've been calling in my notes the metaphysical loneliness.
Sexual Offences Act 1967. An act to amend the law of England and Wales relating to homosexual acts.
Excuse me, I actually
27th
wanted
July,
to
1967.
say something at the start.
Be
The
it
project
enacted
here
by
is to
the
think about the
Queen's
public
most
and the
excellent
private. And
Majesty,
apropos of that,
by and
I
with
thought it was quite
the
clever of me.
advice
One of
and
my aims here is to
consent
find
of the
her
Lord
again.
Spiritual and
To use this very
temporal
public moment,
and
you know, it's
commons,
being like,
in in this
very
present
private her.
Parliament
It was
assembled,
Glasgow Pride
and by the
weekend, late
authority of
July.
the
They
same,
pushed it back to
as
coincide with the
follows.
Commonwealth Games. She was working
1.
there as a security guard. I remember
Notwithstanding any
her
statutory
hair was
or
completely
common law
white. Her
provision,
face was weathered, but her
but
skin was
subject
soft.
to the
So
provisions of
it's
the
like this
next
kind of
following section,
ageless creature, and I
a
feel embarrassed
homosexual
for
act
recalling
in
only the
private
stuff
shall
about her
not be
body
an
now.
offense,
She was really
provided
cool. I
that the
mean, in the
parties
sense of that
concerned
really great
thereto
combination of relaxed
and
but
have
firm,
attained
firm
the
like
age of
assertive,
21
confident,
years.
and confident but relaxed, not passive. Wow.
2.
I guess I
which
do
would
think about her
otherwise
a
be
lot
treated
still.
for the purposes of this act as being done in private
Is it the brevity
shall
of the
not be
encounter
treated
that
if
haunts
done,
me?
A, when more than 2 persons take part or are
Truly,
present,
a
or
day
B,
doesn't go by
in a
when I don't
lavatory
think of
to
her.
which the public have or are permitted
I never
to have
found
access,
out
whether on payment or otherwise.
much about her at all. I don't think I even found out her name. I barely remember what she looks like. Maybe you've seen her?
The other remains infinitely transcendent, infinitely foreign. His face in which his epiphany is produced, and which appeals to me, breaks with the world that can be common to us, whose virtualities are inscribed in our nature and developed by our existence. I don't think your work is so much these objects and installations, but rather actually in this thing that you're doing
It is both
beforehand,
touching and tangible.
walking around,
Furthermore, the
studying
relationship
these
is
holes in the
reversible.
sidewalk,
The hand that touches can
going
be
to the
felt as
river,
touched, and
obsessing
vice
about the
versa,
water,
though never
sitting in
both
the
at the same
abandoned
time. And it
areas.
is this reversibility that picks out as the essence of flesh. Hey, before I go, I'm going to tell you a secret. I mean, like a real one, because some of you in the audience know that I legally changed my full name, and it's kind of out there to do that. And when I picked Marota, it was actually because it was a girl's first name without etymology, but then later I found out that it's actually, or I realized that it's French for emerald. And anyway, there you go.
Porosity and its fullest responsiveness can occur only within difference, a porosity that moves from the inside to the outside of the body. The most profound intimacy becomes a protective veil, turns itself into an aura that preserves the nocturnal quality of the encounter without masks. Distance of the impenetrable and the clarity of daylight,
of that which
perceives but never beholds
itself.
Paradoxically, the most intimate is not a point of transparency,
But rather a point of opacity.